In today's session, we're going to be talking about customers' data. Who is ultimately responsible for customers' data? And specifically, we'll use cloud as an example, right? So let's look at the components, right? So first of all, we have the data processor, right? The entity that's processing the data. This could be Google Cloud, this could be Azure, this could be AWS. Then we have the company X, Y, and Z, that's actually collecting the information about the data subject, right? And the data subject is people like you and me, right? So the data controller, company X, Y, and Z, is collecting information and deciding what's going to be done with it, where it's going to be stored, how is it going to be processed, what information you're going to do with it. So ultimately, when we look at this kind of equation here, even though there's a shared responsibility model in place between the data processor and the data controller, in this event, the data processor taking all the security measures to protect the infrastructure of the cloud, right? The data controller is still responsible for the data in the cloud, right? Or the data subject. So ultimately, the data controller is responsible for that data subject. Right. So now let's look a little bit deeper dive, because in the cloud model we have different models, right? Different deployment modes: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, right? So let's look a little bit more detail here, right? So in the PaaS model, what we actually see is we see a company, right? So a vendor, right? So let's say company A, B, and C, right? What they're doing is they're building on top of the cloud provider like Azure, AWS, GCP, or something like that, a PaaS service. So an example here could be possibly Twilio, right? So Twilio offers a PaaS service to its customers, right? And it's built on a public cloud infrastructure. So the data controller in this model is Twilio, right? Because it's collecting the information, the data about its data subject, right? So that's an example of a platform as a service, right? But if we were to look at a SaaS option, right? So someone like, say, Salesforce, right? So Salesforce, again, is built on a public cloud infrastructure on the back end. The data controller in this instance is Salesforce, because it's the one that's actually collecting all the data and everything, right? Now, if we go back to the PaaS models and add a little bit of a different twist to it, let's say that so a company like Twilio offers a PaaS service, and then another company X, Y, and Z is consuming that PaaS service, right? So ultimately, it is that company that would be responsible for the data that is collecting, right? Not necessarily Twilio, but again, Twilio, along with the public cloud provider, needs to do the shared responsibility model and do the due care and due diligence, right? So really, when we're looking at here, the easiest way to remember is the entity that's directly collecting it, making the decisions about the data, is ultimately responsible for the data in conjunction with all the other components as well. Thank you, and that concludes today's session.